The wind carried dust across the empty plains of Wyoming, a restless whisper that tugged at the ends of Emma Langley's shawl as she stepped down from the wagon. Her father didn't look at her, hadn't looked at her much in weeks, not since the doctor's words back in Cheyenne. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Langley. The scarring is too deep. She'll never bear children." Her mother's eyes had filled with shame, not sorrow. Shame, for a daughter who could no longer be traded into a good marriage. And now, standing on the edge of a stranger's ranch, that shame clung to Emma like the dust on her boots. The man who stepped out of the barn was broad-shouldered, tall, and sun-browned. A wide-brimmed hat, shaded eyes the color of old whiskey. His shirt sleeves were rolled to the elbow, and his hands, rough, scarred, looked like they'd built everything around her from scratch. "Mr. Carver," Emma's father began, his voice too loud, too cheerful. "This here's Emma. Strong girl. Knows how to cook, so keep a clean home. She'll make a fine wife." The man's gaze flicked to Emma. He nodded once. "Appreciate that. But I'm not looking for a wife, Mr. Langley. I'm looking for help. Someone to keep house, maybe tend the garden." Her father's jaw tightened. "You'd be doing her a kindness, sir. She's had some trouble. Needs a new start." The air grew thick. Emma's heart thudded. She wanted to speak, to say "I'm not some broken thing," but the words stuck. After a long silence, the rancher said quietly, "I don't mind trouble." And just like that, Emma was left behind as her father drove away, leaving her standing beside a stranger's barn in the fading light. The ranch was called Dry Creek, though the creek that wound through the property wasn't dry at all. It shimmered silver in the mornings, alive with the sound of frogs and birds. The house itself was plain, 2 stories, white paint peeling, but there was something steady about it, something that whispered of endurance. Thomas Carver didn't talk much. He showed her where to find water, how to feed the chickens, where the linens were stored. He had a quietness that wasn't cold, just worn, like a man who'd buried too many words along the trail. The first night, Emma lay awake in the small back room, listening to the wind howl through the shutters. For the first time in months, no one was scolding her, no one was whispering about her failures. But the silence was heavy with questions. She found out soon enough that Thomas had been a widower for nearly 3 years. His wife, Clara, had died of fever that swept through the valley. They'd had no children. "Just me and the land now," he said simply one morning, watching the horizon as he drank his coffee. Emma nodded, unsure what to say. Weeks passed. Slowly, the tension in Emma's chest began to ease. She rose before dawn, baked bread, mended shirts, and planted herbs along the back porch. When she sang while she worked, soft hymns her mother once hummed, Thomas would pause, hat in hand, listening from a distance. It wasn't until the first storm of the season that something shifted. The sky turned black that afternoon, thunder rolling over the hills like cannon fire. Emma rushed to gather laundry off the line, but the wind ripped the sheets from her hands. Lightning cracked, close, too close, and before she could move, Thomas was there, pulling her toward the house. "You'll get yourself killed out here," he shouted over the roar of rain. "I can handle a little weather," she snapped, breathless, clutching a wet sheet to her chest. He stared at her then, really stared, as the storm raged around them. "You don't have to prove you're strong, Emma." Her voice trembled. "If I don't, who will believe it?" Something in his expression softened. Without another word, he took her hand and led her inside. That night, the fire burned low in the hearth. Rain battered the roof. Emma sat by the flames, wringing water from her hair. Thomas poured her a cup of coffee and sat across from her. "You don't talk much about where you came from," he said. "There's not much worth saying." He tilted his head. "Try me." She hesitated, staring into the fire. "My family sold me. Said I was a burden. The doctors said I couldn't bear children. My father said no man would want me then." Her throat tightened, the words scraping out like stones. He wasn't wrong. Thomas didn't speak for a long time. Then he set his cup down. "You think that's all a woman's worth?" She met his gaze. "Seems to be what the world believes." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "The world's a fool then." She blinked, startled by the steel in his voice. He looked into the fire, his jaw tight. "Claire and I tried for years. Never had luck. Folks used to whisper behind our backs. But I didn't marry her for that. I married her because she made this house feel alive. When she laughed, even the storms sounded softer. He looked at Emma again, eyes burning with quiet conviction. You don't have to give a man children to give him something worth living for. The words hit her harder than the storm. She swallowed, unable to look away. Mr. Carver. Thomas, he corrected gently. She whispered his name like a prayer. Thomas. From that night on, the air between them changed. It wasn't spoken, not in words, but it hummed in the space between every glance, every accidental touch. When he came in from mending fences, mud splattered up to his knees, she'd have a meal waiting. When she caught her hand on a splinter, he'd take it gently, wrap it in cloth, and murmur, "You've got to be kinder to yourself." Once, while fixing the shutters together, their hands brushed. She froze. He didn't move. His thumb traced the edge of her fingers, rough, reverent. "Emma," he said softly, "I ain't gonna lie. I didn't plan on wanting you here this much." Her heart stuttered. "You don't mean that." "I do." His eyes were dark, earnest. "I don't need heirs, Emma. I need someone who reminds me what peace feels like." Her breath caught. "And what if I can't give you more than that?" He smiled, slow and sure. "Then I reckon I already have everything I need." Spring came like a promise. The grass turned green, the creek swelled, and the garden Emma planted bloomed with wildflowers she hadn't even meant to grow. One morning, she found a ribbon tied to the porch rail. It was her mother's ribbon, the one she'd left behind in Cheyenne. She looked around, confused, until she saw Thomas walking from the barn. "Found that in your trunk," he said, smiling sheepishly. "Figured it ought to see sunlight again." Her heart clenched. "Why would you do that?" He shrugged. "Because you deserve to be seen." She stepped closer. "You say things no one's ever said to me before." "That's because no one ever looked close enough." And before she could answer, he kissed her, slow, gentle, tasting of morning coffee and dust and something she'd thought she'd never feel again. They married under the cottonwoods by the creek, just the two of them and a preacher who rode in from town. The sky was clear that day, the kind of blue that promised better tomorrows. Afterward, Thomas built her a swing on the porch. They'd sit there in the evenings, watching the sun sink into gold and violet over the plains. Sometimes he'd read aloud from old books, sometimes they'd just listen to the wind. Emma found joy in small things: fresh bread, wildflowers in a jar, the warmth of his hand finding hers in the dark. But not everyone was kind. When they went into town for supplies, whispers followed them. "That's Carver's new wife. The barren one,"